And focuses much on the materials for quantum technologies. We had a colloquium yesterday at Uppsala University where he talked about his latest research, which involves machine learning and how they use that in their experimental, in obtaining experimental results. However, he's got lots of things on his CV, and if I were to read everything, we would be here all night. So since 2010, he's directed the University of Oxford Templeton World Charity Foundation. He has more than 600 publications with over 24,000 citations. However, he's not only a distinguished scientist, but also has engaged a lot in these questions about science and faith and how they interact. So in 2016, in Oxford University, with Oxford University Press, he published a book called The Penultimate Curiosity with a painter, Roger Wagner, which is also the painter who painted this painting that you see up here for the book cover of another book that just came out in 2018. And it's called It Keeps Me Seeking. And that was one of the reasons for us in the network to invite him. We found that this was an excellent book, a very reasoning book about these questions where science and faith interact. And so I highly recommend it. So it's written by together with a philosopher called Hans Halvorson and another physicist called Andrew Steane. And this book was selected by Times Higher Education as Book of the Week for the first issue of 2019. Also, if you open the book cover, you can see recommendations from other distinguished scientists who are not necessarily religious, but are open to these type of questions. So we have Max Tegmark, for instance, and former CERN director Ralph Porter. But I will not talk more. I'll just let Andrew open up for us. We look forward to hearing you.
Thanks very much. It's a joy. Isn't this setting absolutely wonderful? If you get bored with me, just look at the wonderful colours of the trees that we look outside. Now this is a proof of the fact that if you set up your computer half an hour beforehand, it works perfectly every time. If it's only 1 minute beforehand, it becomes a major PhD project. And that it's working there. And as Peter said, the cover of the book is taken from a larger painting by Roger, which I'll come back to at the end. Imagine that this world is like a house, and we live in the house, and we like the house very much. We enjoy it. It provides shelter and warmth. And we're rather curious people. So we like to find out about the house. We like measuring things. We want to find out the size of the rocks and their height. If you're a material scientist like me, you want to find out what they're made of. What's the floor made of? What are the walls and the ceilings made of? You might be interested in electricity and telecommunications. So you want to find out how that works in the house. You might want to find out how the plumbing works, especially as happened to me this morning in my bathroom when it doesn't work. So this morning when I took the plug out of my bath, the water went out of the bottom of the bath into the rest of the bathroom. You might be a social scientist, and you might want to find out the dynamics of how people interact in the house, and which rooms are more private and which rooms are more for public encounters, which rooms are more applied biochemistry, in other words, cooking, and so on. And you go on, studying more and more, and learning more and more about this house. It's really interesting. It's really exciting. Until one day, you discover that the house has windows. And you can look out through the windows. You can even open the windows and let in the autumnal breezes and the sunshine. And the windows, as it were, invite you to a world beyond the house. And there's a similar kind of way in which I think this material world sort of has windows to the transcendent that calls us out to something beyond the house. Different people experience that calling in different ways. It might be through poetry, or the visual arts, or music. And you listen to a Bach cantata, and it calls you out to something beyond just this simple material world that we study so fruitfully with the natural and social sciences, and I would say also through the humanities. And for some people, that leads them to enrich cultural experiences that have a deep validity. For some people, it leads them to a sense of belief in God. A famous example of that was Antony Flew, who described himself as the world's most notorious atheist. And then he wrote this book where the title was There Is No God, which is what he's been saying most of his professional life. And then he crossed it out and said, there is a God. And for him, he describes three ways in which this material world came to something beyond itself. One is the fact that nature obeys laws, which if you're a physical scientist might be Schrodinger's equation or plate tectonics. Or if you're someone in the life sciences, it might be the constraints of evolution, a subject that's changing very fast now, becoming richer and richer with every year that passes. For him there was this dimension of life, of intelligently organized and purpose-driven beings that arose from matter. Some people express it, what properties does the universe need to have in order that some subset of the universe can become conscious of the whole. Can I shut the door? Come in, welcome. Welcome, come and join us. Come and join us. There are seats available. I don't know if there are two seats together. You may have to split up. There are certainly seats. So what properties does the universe have to have in order for the subset to become aware of the whole? And then the very existence of nature. And one of the themes that runs through the book is this, that God is a being to be known and not a hypothesis to be tested. And in that statement, the emphasis is on the to be known. Let's not worry for a moment too much what we mean by a being, but to be known. And you can think of the change that took place. In Greek times, in the ancient Greek philosophers, there were rival theories of how vision works. And there was what was called extramission, namely something goes out from the eye to the object being perceived. And intramission, where something comes from the object being perceived into the eye. And that controversy raged for a little over 1,000 years, was finally resolved in what people are pleased to call the Dark Ages, which were actually anything but, by an Islamic scholar, actually. And but finally it was established that when we see things, it's something going from the object into our eye. And I think sometimes there's a little bit of that in people thinking about God. Sometimes they think of God as a sort of something going out from the human brain, projecting onto reality. And I think that one makes progress when one makes the transition from exclamation to intromission in thinking about God. So what's unhelpful is to make up an idea of what you think God should be like and then seek to prove whether or not he exists. Rather more fruitful is to ask the question, how can I learn about what is there or who is there? And that's why God has a name. That's why God is described as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because we're talking about something specific, with specific interactions in recorded history. When Moses was asked to go on this rather improbable task back to Pharaoh to get the Jews, the Hebrews, out of Egypt, he said, give me your name. Give me your name. Who shall I say sent me? And the reply was, Vayemer Elohim al Moshe, Echeh Asher Echeh. I am who I am, sometimes translated. And one way of thinking about that name is to say that that name encapsulates the richest content of the verb to be. And so it gives the root for the name of God that's often translated in English Bibles as the Lord. And the reason for that is because it was considered too holy to be spoken by a faithful Jew, and therefore they would substitute the word Adonai, which literally means my lords. And they put when the Masoretes put the vowel pointing marks on the Hebrew consonants, they put the vowels for Adonai. So if you mix up the consonants of what we sometimes pronounce as Yahweh with the vowels of Adonai, you get Jehovah. But whatever it wasn't Jehovah. But the real point is that the description of God is inseparable from the history of those who share their experiences of God. And as we begin to look out of the window of this material world to the transcendent beyond, we find ourselves reflecting on some of the sort of big questions that we face in life. Here are some of them. What should I live for and why? What should I believe and why should I believe it? What is morality? Where does it come from? What kind of person should I be? What's meaningful in life? What should I do to live a fulfilling life? And you can probably add to your list, but I think we recognize that those kinds of questions matter, and that those kinds of questions are not going to be resolved by the natural sciences alone, although natural sciences may have a part to play in them. And indeed, in my case, pursuing the natural sciences is part of what I do in order to lead a fulfilling life. And if you ask, we all care about human flourishing. We want to see humans flourish. We want to flourish ourselves. We want our children to flourish and our friends to flourish. And actually we want people in wider society to flourish too. That's something that people have been thinking about since probably before writing. What does it mean for humans to flourish? And now we can think, what are the changes that are taking place in the world that provide new contexts for human flourishing, which mean that the approaches to human flourishing that have been around for a long time either need to be applied in fresh ways or maybe possibly even replaced, but anyway thought through anew. And here are some of the changes you can think of that are taking place in our world that will have an impact on our direction. Changing patterns of religious commitment, changing demographics of life expectancy, achievements of literacy, changing proportions of employment and leisure. And then I put two technological ones at the bottom, advances in machine learning and advances in gene synthesis. And I'd like just to take those two, just to focus in on them a minute, and say, you know, what new sort of questions do those raise that need to be approached? Now, before I do that, I wanted to just to stand back a bit and say, you know, if we're thinking of the transcendent, we're thinking of what lies beyond the windows of this material world in which we live. There are some people, I think a decreasing number actually, but there are still some who say, well, surely science and belief in God are not compatible. And they may raise what is rapidly being seen as a myth of a sort of historical warfare between science and religion. And the reason I call it a myth is because there's now a growing consensus among historians of science that this is a myth that was created towards the end of the 19th century. Two of the names that were associated with it are Draper and White, two universities on the east coast of America. And they were people who wanted to reject religion in general and specifically the Christian religion. And in order to pursue their agenda, they needed to create a backstory that there has always been a conflict between science and religion since early times. And so now the evidence that's being increasingly brought to light by historians like Peter Harrison and others is that you don't actually find the evidence of this warfare before Draper and White and their contemporaries got going. And they created this backstory, which somehow had sort of populist appeal, particularly in the USA, but it spread to the world too. So that now you've got this sort of assumption around science and religion of warfare. Now, as I say, I think that's past its heyday, but it's just worth addressing it and recognizing it in case we come across it. And a rather more positive story is the story of the entanglement between science and religion, and the way that they've often gone together. Because they're human endeavors, sometimes things go wrong. Anything that humans do goes wrong sometimes. But they've gone right, and been very positive a lot of times. And Roger Wagner, whose name has come up already, who I wrote the Penultimate Curiosity with, and I started off our discussions about this about 16 years before we finished the book, looking at the implications on the outside of the first purpose-built large-scale science building in Oxford, and the same in Cambridge. So the one in Oxford is the Museum of Natural History. And here you have, just above the main entrance of the Museum of Natural History, this carving. It's someone with wings, so an angel, and you see in one hand holding, in one hand holding a dish with 3 cells in it, 3 biological cells, in the other hand a book representing the Bible. Because Henry Acland, who was the driving force behind the Museum of Natural History in Oxford, wanted to bring together those two things with actually a third passion too, which was art. And then in Cambridge, this is the Cavendish Laboratory, which was the first purpose-built laboratory in Cambridge. It was the Department of Physics. And almost certainly at the instigation of James Clerk Maxwell, who was responsible for every detail of the laboratory, it has this inscription carved on the doors. But it's quite difficult to read because it's in this elaborate Gothic script, and it's in Latin. by the time I went to Cambridge to do my PhD, it had moved to new premises in West Cambridge, which is where it is now. And in my first year as a graduate student, because I knew the story of James Clerk Maxwell's inscription on the original doors, I suggested to Sir Brian Pippard, the head of department, that it would be splendid to put the inscription over the entrance to the new Cambridge laboratory. And now that not so many people speak English, it would be, not so many physicists read Latin, it would be good to have it in English. And he promised, he undertook to put it to the departmental committee. Only years later did I learn that he thought the department committee would reject it. And he was absolutely astonished when they rather warmly endorsed the idea and agreed to it. So during my time as a PhD student, this was put up over the entrance of the new Cambridge laboratory. And in fact, that photograph is the frontispiece of my PhD thesis. And I was there a little while back and took a more recent picture in colour. They changed the glass doors, but they kept the inscription. And I'm afraid because of the reflection in the glass, I'm sorry this is a bit of a selfie. And I love this inscription because it says that the works of the Lord are great, sought out of all them that have pleasure therein. In other words, what scientists are doing is having the pleasure and enjoyment, and if I dare say so, sometimes it's fun, of finding out how God makes the world work. Well, now, after we finished the book, Roger and I decided to make a film about it. Because I'm a pilot, we thought that it would make a good film if we flew around the Mediterranean, filming at some of the places where significant advances in curiosity took place. And I can show you now a little trailer for the film. You'll see that sometimes we're flying in the plane with headsets and the film crew are in the back, hooked into the audio system of the plane, talking about, filming me and Roger, talking about where we're going and why we're going there and what we hope to see. And the film, this little trailer that I'll show you, picks up the story where Roger and I have been discussing how the motivations for those invocations on the outside of those two buildings are related to the motivations for the science that goes on inside them.
In the book that Andrew and I wrote together, we traced his motivations as far back through history as we could go. And now we're going on a journey to explore some of the key places in the long and extraordinary story that we discovered. I can remember that in the 1990s, what people called the human revolution only happened when Homo sapiens migrated from Africa to Europe and started making paintings.
And what changed that was the discovery in the Blombos caves in South Africa of evidence that people were making symbolic markings 100,000 years ago.
I mean, in the newspapers they described it as the first artist's studio, which I love, because they found these extraordinary abalone shells which were used for storing and actually mixing pigment.
Only last year in Indonesia they discovered evidence that when humans started to migrate from South Africa, one of the things they took with them was painting.
And the first European paintings were discovered just about the time we started writing history.
Or at least thinking about it, yes.
Yeah. And that's where we're going now. This journey will take us across the world and across time. It will begin in France with that discovery of a vast complex of prehistoric paintings. Paintings the leader of the excavations is convinced were religiously motivated.
We really have a religious motivation, first because people didn't live inside those caves.
But paintings which also show an astonishing attention to anatomical accuracy.
Doing it with such accuracy might have been vital because they were recreating that.
It was made perhaps 35,000 years ago, and it's an astonishing piece of work. The journey will take us on to a city on the coast of eastern Turkey.
I mean, the ruins are somewhere inland, so I'm not sure we'll see them. In 600 BC, the letters of the coastal town, a wonderful centre of new thinking.
A city where, in the 6th century BC, a new idea of the divine coincided with a new kind of interest in the natural world. From there we'll follow the route by which one man brought this idea to 5th century Athens.
They got to work out the shadowing of the moon related to the sun. Yeah, he also said that the sun was not a god, but a fiery ball, which in 4th century Athens was a really controversial thing to say. Yeah, I think he was probably quite courageous actually.
And visit the places where it provoked opposition and sparked a whole new way of thinking about the gods and studying the world. We will follow the path of these ideas to Alexandria in Egypt.
But what happened in this great multicultural city when the philosophical religion of the Greeks and the revealed religion of the Jews and Christians came into contact? Well, the answer was rights.
But we will also see how in a newly discovered philosophical school, where Christians and pagans studied together, a Christian philosopher who insisted that nothing should get in the way of truth, anticipated one of Galileo's most famous observational experiments by almost exactly 1,000 years.
Two unequal weights dropped from a given height strike the ground at almost the same time.
Following this trail forward to the city of Pisa in the 16th century, we will discover how Galileo not only repeated that observation, but followed in that early Christian philosopher's footsteps in his conviction that pursuing truth as a Christian duty would reveal deep laws that govern the whole creation. Coming back to Oxford, we will see how in the 17th century religiously motivated natural philosophers sparked what we now call the scientific revolution. And finally, travelling first to Scotland and then to Cambridge, we will see how a 19th century scientist wrote down 4 equations which showed that the whole universe was filled with the surge of electromagnetic waves.
Their description of the fundamental gearing between space and time led directly to Einstein's theories, but they also provide the basis for all the electronic technologies that shape the modern world. The world we live in today begins with these equations.
And we will see how for that 19th century scientist, the discovery of those 4 equations, which revealed the deep unity of fundamental aspects of the universe, was carried along.
Human beings seem to reach out beyond the horizon of the visible world in order to try and make sense of it as a whole. You could describe it as ultimate curiosity. If then our curiosity about the world around us moves, as it were, in the slipstream of that ultimate curiosity, you could describe it as penultimate curiosity.
The complete film is available as a DVD with a study guide that's designed to be used in a group for 6 sessions, or it could be an individual. It's designed for a group. So those are available. There's a few left that are available over there. Anyone would like to take them and see the whole film. Well, now, let me move rather quickly to the 2 advances in technology that I talked about. The first one is machine learning, and the machine learning is a change in the paradigm of computer decision making, in that instead of programming the computer to make a decision about something, You program the computer to learn how to make a decision about something. And machine learning is all about the managing good decisions in the context of uncertainty. And that means it uses a great deal of probability theory, including the kind of conditional probability that's encapsulated in Bayes' theorem. This is the only picture we have that purports to tell us what the Reverend Thomas Bayes looks like, but it's actually rather uncertain as to whether this really is him. If that's not him, we don't have a more reliable picture. And the way that this kind of machine learning works is you ask yourself, suppose that I have a belief about something, but there's some uncertainty in the belief. How can I reduce the uncertainty? And the answer is by obtaining more data. But the data may be costly to acquire. It could be, if it's in uncertainty about how people would vote in a forthcoming election, you could do a public opinion survey. But public opinion surveys are very expensive. So you want to choose very carefully when you do it, who you ask, and what questions you put on the survey. And the same is true in our laboratory. The experiments we do are costly, both in terms of money, but also in terms of time. And so we want to choose very carefully what is the next measurement that we should make in the laboratory. And you can sort of illustrate it like this, that here we've got, here's a device that we've got in the schematic. We're saying that the performance of the device, which might be the current through it, varies as a function of only one parameter, which might be a voltage. And the dotted line represents our prior belief. And then this mauve band represents the uncertainty. And what we want to do is we want to use Bayesian optimization to say where should we make the next measurement. And so you go through the process, and in this particular case it says make the next measurement at that voltage there. So it does that, and now that reduces the uncertainty, increases the confidence and accuracy there. And now we repeat the cycle. Well, where should the next one be? And it says, well, try making the next one there. And so it does, and we get improved accuracy and confidence as time goes by. We do that now in the laboratory. The machine decides what the next measurement should be in real time. So the machine learning is actually controlling the experiments and what measurements to make next. And you can see the particular device I'm going to show you a result from is a quantum dot in gallium arsenide. We want the quantum dot to contain a single electron or a small number of electrons, and we measure the current through it. And we can control the quantum dot with these various gates called EG, V1, V2, and EG. And we're going to display the results in what's called a stability diagram. So you've got the source drain bias here, and the gate voltage across there. And the colour here is an indication of the current that's flowing through it, measured in picoamps. And what we're going to do is to make some sparse measurements, just a few, and then on the basis of previous training, the machine says, well, here are some predictions of what the full picture might look like. And they're not quite the same. In fact, we have to tell the machine to introduce some uncertainty. And they don't all have equal probability either, so it can give different probabilities, these ones. And then, on the basis of these, it says, where am I going to learn most by making another measurement? Well, it's not going to learn much by measuring, in the middle of a white patch like that, because they're all white there, so it won't distinguish between them. It's likely to learn more by going to one of these edges, because where the edges are differs slightly. And so what it does is it calculates what's called an information gain map here, and the darker the colour, the more it will learn from making a measurement at that point. So the information gain map, sometimes called acquisition function, is an indication of the benefit that will accrue from making a measurement with those parameters. So it makes the measurements, and then it goes around again through this loop until it reaches some criterion for stopping. Now what I'm going to show you is some real data, so this is what it actually looks like when the machine is running the experiment. It goes quite fast, and on the left-hand side is the measurements that have been made so far, on the basis of which it updates the acquisition map, on the basis of which it goes back and makes some more measurements. And you'll see that process happening. You can imagine that where the 64 measurements have already been made on the left, is dark on the right, he's not going to learn much from making measurements there. And one of the questions you can ask yourself is, at what stage do we actually know everything we need to know in terms of the shape of these diamonds, which is what really counts in these measurements? So off we go. See? So you can ask yourself, at what point have I really got the picture? Maybe about there, maybe. You see? And so it's made the most useful measurements early on. Now this whole field of machine learning, we're using it routinely in the lab now. Everyone who uses the internet at all is increasingly being exposed to machine learning. And the way in which most people are subject to it is that every time they use anything from Google or Amazon or Facebook or those big IT companies, the companies are harvesting data from. There have been various sort of estimates people have made, after 15 searches on Google. Google knows as much about you as your friends do. And after 150, it knows as much about you as your wife does. Well, whatever you take of those numbers, it's learning about you very fast. It's learning about your preferences. And it may be then targeting information at you, and it may even be seeking to change your preferences. And it may be doing that for commercial reasons or other reasons that you might not be so pleased about. I want to give you just one final illustration of how fast this machine learning is going for writing. And the example I'm going to give you is one from a whole series of demonstrations that you can look up on the web, where you have a small amount of human-generated text, and then the machine is asked to predict what would follow. So it's predicted writing. It's saying from a small amount, what would follow after that. And the example I'll give you is one where the human-generated text is deliberately rather fanciful. And the reason they did that is they wanted to choose a topic on which it's most unlikely that there's anything else already written on the web. And therefore the machine can't just plagiarize from copying and pasting from the web. So you'll see it's a scenario where probably you couldn't find anything on the web that's actually written about that scenario. And then I want you to read what the machine wrote and ask yourself, if I hadn't told you that was a machine, would you have known that it wasn't a human writing it? So here we go. This is one example of many. So the system prompt that was human written was, in a shocking finding, scientists discovered a herd of unicorns living in a remote, previously unexplored valley in the Andes Mountains. Even more surprising to the researchers was the fact that the unicorns spoke perfect English. So you won't find that story on. Now, I'll just give you a moment to read through it rather than me reading it out. See what you make of it. Isn't that amazing? that was entirely written by a machine, that whole piece. It's astonishing. And isn't it just, you know, lovely that it sort of makes up these things about DNA and so on, which aren't in the original prompt at all, but sort of seem completely plausible when you read it. So, anyway, those are the sorts of things the machines are doing. So now you can begin to ask, you know, about machines in science. Can a machine make a scientific discovery? Can it manifest those kinds of properties that normally we would think of these as human attributes? To what extent can it? You'll find a little bit about this in chapter 5 with Greek machine physics. There have been some reports on machine learning and AI. Here are a couple of reports that have come out in the UK. I expect there are some in Sweden, I expect. What will machine learning affect? Well, almost every area of life. I personally think that it will make bigger differences to our lives than anything that our current politicians in the UK are talking about. Even Brexit, machine learning will make bigger differences to us than that. Everything from employment and transportation to surveillance capitalism. That's the way that the machines are harvesting data about us. And possibly the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and the way that if we don't address it could lead to injustice and unrest and possibly international political instability. And this sort of thing is increasingly subject to targeting you in ways it's very hard to know whether what you're being fed is genuine and authentic or not. So I've had a number of messages in the last year purporting to be from the taxman, really not pretty convincing, but weren't actually from the taxman. Here's one that I showed in India when I was in Bangalore a few weeks ago, and this is a sign that's a picture from a march in Mysore, in Madhya Pradesh, in June last year, purportedly in defense of an accused rapist. He was a Muslim called Irfan, who was alleged to have raped an 8-year-old. And these Muslims, protesting for his release, are introduced with the caption, the Quran sanctions rape of young girls, if they are of a different religion. And the placard says, release Irfan, in Hindi. And this caused major racial tension and unrest in India when it went viral. But in fact, it had been photoshopped. And the actual caption on the placard, the original photograph in the demonstration, said, "We won't tolerate attacks on daughters. Stop this brutality." So here was a machine being used to target this influence in ways that were wholly unhelpful. And this is why, as we address this, we need input from all the disciplines. This is a picture of illustrating Shakespeare's play Othello. And what a wonderful piece of literature. Shakespeare got there first to see how targeted influence can persuade someone of something that has no basis in fact and which leads to disastrous consequences. And the play is the death of 4 of the characters. So what are the challenges of machine learning and the opportunities? Should these technologies be embraced? What is adequate safety engineering? How will the benefits be distributed? As machines more and more acquire human attributes, I don't finish a children's book in English, will my rabbits go to heaven? It's a very natural question for a small child to ask, who will a pet rabbit? Will my robot go to heaven? Slightly less sensibly, should robots have legal rights? Will become questions. But then deeper and deeper, you ask, what gives my life meaning? And we're trying going to make these ethical decisions about the effects of technology, what are humans for? We'll come back to that in a moment. Because the next thing I want to tell you about is about gene synthesis. This relates to work in my laboratory where we study how electricity goes through a single molecule. So the kind of experiments we do are to take a porphyrin molecule and to wire it up in a gap about 2 nanometers wide in a graphene nanowire. And we can actually see what we're doing with this sort of resolution. So this is now routine in Oxford. These are carbon atoms. They're 142 picometers apart. And using high-resolution aberration-directed electron microscopy, we have a resolution of about 80 picometers with a displacement sensitivity of about 5 picometers, which means you can tell the difference between different hybridization in the carbon-carbon bonds. And we can study quantum resonant phenomena. This is a Fano resonance. Those are actually experimental data. The dots on the right fitted to the theoretical curve for Fano resonance in a structure whose cartoon is shown on the left. We can measure the thermoelectric voltage generated by one molecule with a temperature difference across the two sides of the molecule, measure the voltage that it creates. We can compare it with theoretical models such as the Mott theory. We can even, when we pass electricity through a molecule, the data on the right are showing features that correspond to the sort of vibrational nodes that are shown. And this isn't just a cartoon, this is actually density functional theory calculated and then turned into a movie like that. And because of these interests in how electricity flows through a single molecule, I'm now on the board of a gene synthesis company called Evenetics, who are all set to be able to synthesize a complete human genome ad initio. And the way that it works is fantastic technology. It works by having these chips where they can control very precisely the temperature of each square on the chip. So they make it rather uniform within a square, and each square is rather well isolated from the neighboring square. And initially you use that to grow a relatively short length of an oligoma. So you take a little bit of oligoma that's capped, and you decide, and of course there's one on each square, and you can choose which one you're going to extend the length of, and you heat it up slightly, and you heat it up with sufficient precision that the cap will come off in that one with no others, and then you wash over it the next base that you want to add to your oligoma. So the next base gets added, and that too is capped, and then you can choose which cap to take off. And so you can grow an oligoma like that. And now comes the really clever bit. Previous attempts, or current attempts, because you can buy DNA on the web, you just sort of go to the website and you type in the sequence you want, and you get out your credit card and it arrives to the post a couple of days later. But they can only do it for 200 or 300 bases, and after that the error rate becomes unacceptably high. So the DNA's, the error rate becomes too great for it to be very useful for anything. So what you need is a way of doing fault-tolerant error correction. It was fault-tolerant error correction actually was invented by my co-author in teaching Andrew Steane, that completely transformed the feasibility of building quantum computers. If you want to apply it more generally, actually we need fault-tolerant error correction in humans. And there we call it forgiveness. You need fault-tolerant error correction for this, and the way that works is to use this thermal capability again. So in these cartoons, we take two of these strands that we've created, and they're created so that they're complementary, and they should match together in a way that you make a double helix in life DNA. If there's an error in them, so if they don't quite match up, then the melting temperature is slightly lower than it would be for a perfect double helix strand. And now by this exquisitely precise control of the temperature of these squares, you can put it at a temperature where if it's perfect DNA, it survives, but if it's got an error in it, then it comes apart and can be washed away. And in that way they can remove all the faulty DNA and keep only error-corrected DNA. And then the trick is to use the power of the exponential. So you've got a bit here that you've ensured it's error-free, and you take a bit more, so you double the length. And then you do that again and double the length again. And I don't know, are you all familiar with the story of the Chinese person who wanted 1 grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard, and 2 grains on the next square, and 4 on the next square? And you very quickly get an enormous amount of rice. And you very quickly get to the point where it's long enough to correspond to a complete genome. So now you think, what are we going to do with this capability when it comes along? Well, there have been a number of reports. There are some of them, the recent ones, been quite a lot more in America. Again, I expect there are some in Sweden. People have tried to come up with principles of biomedical ethics. These 4 are quite widely accepted in medicine. But now you try and apply them, so you think the individual should make his or her own choice. How do we apply that to an unborn child? A bit difficult. Okay. And one of the other things that we realize from other branches of medicine is that the distinction between curing and enhancing sounds simple until you try to do it. And then once you try to do it, you discover it isn't as simple as that, it's more complex. So what might gene synthesis offer? Well, it could offer choices in conception. You could do it the old-fashioned way, which is cheaper and more fun than more interventionist ways, which gives what one person called the benign wisdom and unfathomable cruelty of nature, with risks analogous to not immunizing your children. You know that this week in the British papers there have been these cases of kids that don't have MMR inoculations. You know, is that fair to do that to your kid? Not to give them the inoculations, so that later in life they'll be susceptible to those diseases. So that's under discussion in the UK. So what happens if we get to the point, which we're not there yet, so at the moment it's science fiction, but before too long we may understand better the multi-genome basis of susceptibility to cancer, and to heart disease, and to problems in mental health, and probably some other diseases too. So what will happen in the years to come? People have a child who succumbs to one of these. Facing a child with terrible mental illness, and turns around their parents and say, well, you had the technological capability, so you give me a genetic basis that would have made this less probable. Why didn't you do it? Those are the kinds of ethical issues that I think we're going to face. And then you can think, with genetically modified crops, we modify them for performance, better drought resistance or whatever. What happens if one day, which may not be too far away, we have the capacity to modify humans for performance? A good way of engaging with the public about this is to think of genetically modified athletes. Have we seen the last Olympic Games that had non-GM athletes? You may know that earlier today someone ran a marathon in under 2 minutes. 2 hours without drugs. But we all know, because it catches the public imagination about drugs in sport. Okay, when you say, well, sport, it's a voluntary acceptance of completely arbitrary criteria. There may be other areas of life where the criteria are less arbitrary, and when a GM or gene synthesis might alter the possibilities. So, synthetic biology. What are the challenges and opportunities should you cure a single point gene defect an individual, well, that's lawful in the US already. The FDA have made that legal for the somatic, not in German, because of the safety engineering, to use GM to enhance performance. But then again, we come back to this question, what do you think about it? What does it mean? What does it mean for humans to life? What are we here for? Why are we here? So let me come back to this question of the transcendent and the human. Because if you think, what is it that's unique about us as humans? What makes humans very remarkable, very special? And there are lots of things that you can discuss, many of which you can find in incipient form in animals, things like scientific experiments. You can see crows doing things like that, memory, cooperation, cumulative culture. They appear in tiny forms in animals and in very, very big form in humans. But it seems to me that one of the key things that we humans have is responsibility. Sometimes people discuss free will, and I know why they discuss that, but I find it personally quite a difficult concept. If I look back at things I did, I'm not sure how free I was, I'm not sure how much I was influenced by parents and teachers and pastors and friends and the culture, probably more than I care to admit. So I'm not quite sure how free I am in decisions, but I'm absolutely sure I couldn't live my life if I didn't know that I was responsible for the choices that I made and decisions that I implemented. And the early chapters of Genesis have a lot to say about this. In Genesis 2, you get the second description of the creation of man and woman. In Genesis chapter 2, and then you say, well, by the time we got to the end of chapter 2, is the description complete? Well, the author certainly didn't think so, because then he goes on in chapter 3 to address the issue of responsibility for decision-making and for resulting actions. And you get that also in the account that precedes it, of creation in Genesis chapter 1. Where we get this repeated sort of refrain, by Yera Elohim Kitov, and God saw that it was sometimes translated as very good. I think in its context, a better English translation is fit for purpose. Look at these things he made. They'll do. They're fit for purpose. And then he created man and woman in his image, in the image of God. He created them. You get this word for image said, repeated, and quite a good way of thinking of that is the kind of statue that a ruler would put up in a part of his territory that he didn't often visit, just to remind you who's in charge and who you're accountable to. So this sense of being responsible and accountable seems to run right through the earliest accounts of what men and women are for. And so as we think, why are we here? What are we for? We look out of this window to the world beyond. This idea that we're responsible and therefore accountable to whom seems to be pretty prominent. This is a picture of Andrew Steane and Hans Halvorson and me talking about these things in the context of writing the book. It keeps me seeking. After we've taken the picture, Roger Wagner pointed out that if you look at the poses of the three heads of Andrew and Hans and me, they seem to correspond rather remarkably closely to the poses of the three heads on the title page of Galileo's Discourses. So here you've got Aristotle, Ptolemy and Copernicus. Well, I assure you that any such coincidence is entirely unintended. The picture that appears in the end papers of the book, It Keeps Me Seeking, is this one by Roger. And it's a painting called Writing in the Dust. And as so often in Roger's paintings, he uses modern technology to bring into the present a story that you recognize from the literature of the past. And the attention to detail is just astonishing. If you could see the original, I don't know if it's visible with this resolution, the original which hangs in Auckland Castle, in the top right-hand corner of that smartphone there's a tree. And the reason is that it's the tree that's out of the picture over here that's casting that shadow there. And you see some people throwing stones at the woman, but others taking pictures with their phones, and it's a TV camera over there. In many Bibles, this story might have the heading in English, The Woman Taken in Adultery. Roger subsequently wrote a poem about it, which he entitled The Men Taken in Hypocrisy. And the poem starts off, you can see the features, the beating of a swallow's wings, a stone jar poised as if to fall. And I'd like, if I may, to close by reading you the poem. The beating of a swallow's wings, a stone jar poised as if to fall, a fierce and unforgiving sun that beats on a whitewashed wall, that finds and tracks each human floor and reads the writing in the dust of broken hopes and powdered dreams and love reclassified as lust, where images of shameful death describe a life defined by blame, the beatings of a swallow's wings above a place of public shame are like the barest breath of grace that stir the unforgiving air, that shift the eye, the gaze, and lead the eye beyond the camera's fatal stare to where one writes within that dust of dry bones in a bone-dry place of broken hopes and powdered dreams, the unseen, unhoped words of grace which free accuser and accused, which spell out how our life begins, a motion like a breath of grace, the beating of the swallow's wings. It's all about grace, undeserved love. That's why human flourishing, because humans need this grace, they need this undeserved love. That's why human flourishing needs this transcendent dimension. That's why we need to look out of the window. Often when people are talking about science and Christian faith, they get hung up about miracles. What do you think about miracles? Because miracles, as described, aren't what we expect to happen. And we chose this picture because there's so much else that Jesus said and did that isn't what you expect. It's just different from what you expect. And sometimes we fail to be as surprised as we should be because we've sort of got used to it. But it's very remarkable what he offers. And that's why we chose that picture for the cover of the book.